This afternoon we have the honor of having a very special guest. Special to me because he's a good friend, and he is the son of Margaret Grazioli, who was our director for many, many years, and she was also a friend, and she was my mentor. I loved her dearly, and she was very generous with sharing her thoughts about library history, which she contained right up in her head. It was like a computer. She kept everything in her head, and I can remember people calling her for facts, and she would just shoot them out. So, Roger, would you please fill us in on some of the personal life of Margaret Grazioli?
Sure. And I thank you for everything you just said about my mother. She adored you too, Kathy. My mother was a wonderful woman. We'll get into her civic activities a little bit later, but at home with her family, my father, she was married to for 51 years, and they had a great marriage, a real partnership. She was a wonderful mother to my sister and I, my sister Kathleen Freitag, and myself, and of course a great grandmother to my two nephews, Jason and Justin Freitag, and my niece Amanda Freitag, who is famous in her own right. She's a rather famous chef and celebrity on TV, and has spoken here at the public library. My mother, things she liked to do, and this could be as no surprise, reading, obviously. She liked to read, and which drew her, I believe, to libraries in the first place. She liked also going to movies. That was a big thing for us. I remember when we were little, on Saturday, we lived in Weehawken, and on Saturday nights each week, we would walk. It wasn't that far. It was in Union City, but it was only a few blocks to Lincoln Theater, and see the movie that was there. We would always make sure we got there for the coming attraction, and we continued that into later life. Even my mother, father, and I would go to the movies later on, and after my father passed away, I still went with my mother, and we left an empty seat for my father. So these are the things she liked to do, but she was a wonderful parent, and two great-grandchildren. Jason had two daughters, Lizzie and Megan, and Lizzie was born just a couple weeks before my mother died. Megan was born after my mother passed away, so she had two great-grandchildren also.
She was wonderful with her advice on a personal level. She would always say to me, Kathy, go on vacation now. Do everything you want to do now. One of you will be sick later on in life. And it is unfortunate she didn't get to share her retirement with your father. When she was director of the Secaucus Public Library, she was also director of the Weehawken Public Library. We'd go to meetings together, so she would have me vote for Secaucus when she voted for Weehawken, whichever the vote was going to be. How did she manage to do both?
Okay, well, in order to explain, I'm going to go back a little bit to when she started her career working in libraries. She originally started as the children's librarian in Weehawken. She held that position for about 5 years. And then she went back to school and received her library director's certificate, and eventually became the director of the Weehawken Public Library. In those days, Weehawken and Secaucus was very close. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Secaucus students went to Weehawken. The superintendent of schools in Weehawken and Secaucus corroborated on this, and they asked my mother to become the director in Secaucus, because Secaucus needed a director. At first she said no, because she was loyal to Weehawken. And then she came out here, she saw the building, and she fell in love with it. And she wanted to be director in Secaucus. But Weehawken didn't want to let her go that quickly. So they worked out a deal that she would be the full-time director in Secaucus, but she would also be a member of the Weehawken Library Board, so that they had someone with a director's certificate on the library board. This way they didn't have to hire a separate director. And so in name only, she was director. I remember driving her up there once a month for board meetings. So that's how she pulled that off, director of both libraries.
Well, she did a great job in both libraries, so.
And during the period of time that was transpiring, in all the 35 years she was in Secaucus, she was still director in name only of Weehawken.
And they loved her.
Yep,
They loved her there
absolutely.
because she wanted me to go and be director of Weehawken. At one point in time, she was getting tired of doing both.
Right.
And they would have no part of that because they wanted your mother, and I didn't want to go. I wanted your mother too. Well, as the director in Secaucus now, what do you think her librarianship was most dedicated to?
Oh,
You heard the
that's
stories.
yeah. This is an easy question. Children. My mother was always. She started out as a children's librarian, and she completely renovated the children's department in Weehawken. And then when she came here, she had the same motivation and started the story hour, which was taking place in the Plaza Library on the bottom floor. And that expanded into library school, which for many years served as the preschool here in Secaucus, because they actually didn't have a preschool in the public school system. There were like private preschools, but that was the preschool, and that was her pride and joy. That was so much. Now, my mother was also involved with a lot of other things, and if you ask me in a further question, I'll bring them up. But I want to mention some of the things that she was actually.
Well, why don't you go right ahead and do it now?
I like that. I wrote them down because there's so many. It's kind of impossible to remember. In addition to being director of Secaucus Public Library and on the board in Weehawken Public Library, my mother was president of the Secaucus Women's Club, president of the Benevolent Guild of Elks in Weehawken, president of the Hudson County Library Association, president of the Weehawken Garden Club, president of the junior high and high school PTAs in Weehawken. She's in Who's Who Among America's Women. She was president of the Paul Amico Association. She started the Paul Amico Scholarship Program, which still exists today. And in 1995, when she became unable to serve on it, I actually took a place on it, and I'm still on that committee today. And we've helped a lot of students with, of course, with Paul Amico's generosity. She was the vice president of the Secaucus Library Board of, Secaucus Board of Education. I didn't mention that. In 1976, my mother ran for the Board of Education here in Secaucus, and I believe she was the first woman elected to public office here in Secaucus. I know Patty Ferrari was the first councilwoman elected, but I believe that was after my mother was elected to the Board of Education. I know she was the first woman elected to the Board of Education. And on the Board of Education, she was the vice president. She served 3 years on the Board of Education in Secaucus. She was a member of the Weehawken Library Board. She was the Jersey Journal Woman of Achievement. And as I mentioned, all these, I should say, I may have missed something. I believe she was involved in the Red Cross also, but she was president of these organizations at the same time. I remember coming home from school, coming home from work, and where's Mom? Oh, she's at the women's club, she's at the library, she's at the garden club. It was amazing. She was an amazing woman.
She was one of a kind. In
So
that
right,
way.
so getting back to being director of 2 libraries, she actually pulled all this
That
off
was
also.
nothing. She did. There was more. Even when the libraries became regionalized, she was a very played an important role.
She was, I didn't mention it, the president of Region 3
Yes, she
Library
was.
Association.
She was, and that was a difficult job and a busy job.
Yeah.
So I really don't know how she found time. She had energy beyond belief. So.
Well, I believe that's why she was chosen by the Jersey Journal as Woman of Achievement.
Yes, certainly.
And I remember distinctly in 1967 the first nomination and an appointment to the to that position. I think she was actually later on a second time named Jersey Journeywoman of Achievement, but I'm a little vague on that.
Okay. I'm sure she did something, and right now she's our woman of achievement. She also had a vision. She had many visions, but this vision was for a much larger library, either at the location where we were or a brand new building. And she started that many, many years, putting that seed out there. It took 20 years for the old library to move to Plaza Center. It took 20 years for us to get this. Most of that time was the dedication of your mother. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think my mother and downstairs, the children's center of this library is dedicated in her name, the Margaret Grazioli
Yes,
Children's Wing. And I think this is what she envisioned, or certainly something like this. Unfortunately, she was deceased by the time this library was built, but she envisioned a library like this. This is what she perceived, this is what she pushed for, and it happened. And she, even though she had passed away, she was one of the driving forces. And I think that's why the town elders chose to name a wing of the library after her, and deservedly so. But this is what she would have envisioned, Kathy.
I think so, because we used to talk so much, and she didn't like driving too much, so I went with her to so many of her meetings, and we would see a little bit of this library we liked, and
Right.
a little bit of that one, and this is what I think she would have loved. I think so. I was comfortable with the fact that I knew my friend Margaret would love it. I didn't know how the town would take it when they saw it, but luckily...
And appropriately, the Children's Center
Yes.
is named after her. That's so appropriate because that was her passion.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. She would, in the days when your mom was there, we could have children come in and sit on our laps and type on our typewriters.
Yeah, it's
and,
different
oh,
times.
times are so different.
But
They were in that director's office all the time.
Yeah.
It was open door policy.
Sure.
So we loved that. As she looks down from heaven today, what do you think she'd like to say? What do you think she'd tell us?
I think, well, first of all, she would say, great job with the library, what's been accomplished here, what's been accomplished by you. I'm sure she loved you, Kathy, and she would have wanted you to follow in her footsteps. And I think Jennifer May, who was a student, I was a teacher here, I'm sure she would have, well, I was a teacher while she was alive, but I'm sure she would have been very proud of the career I accomplished. And Jennifer May was a student of mine, the present
Yes, that's
director.
right.
So one director was my mother, another director was a student of mine, and in between, a good friend.
Yes.
I think in terms of her family, she would be very proud of my niece Amanda, who's, well, to say it, world famous.
Yes, she is.
Not to mention Jason. Jason's a professor in college, and Justin's a guidance counselor in a high school. So they all went into the education field, as did I. And I think she would be very proud of all that and what she left behind in terms of the family and in terms of the library in the town of Secaucus.
I think the words we could say to her is a job well done.
Oh,
I mean, she
absolutely.
certainly left nothing unturned.
No.
And there are people who talk of her today in the same
Right.
vein that they spoke of her years ago, with love
Yes.
and
Yeah.
motherhood and apple pie. That's what
I've
we always
actually
said.
never heard anything negative said about my mother ever in any
No.
context. And even on different sides of the political fence, people who might not have had the same political views, they still praised and thought my mother was wonderful. So,
Well, in the library we're very fortunate. Everybody's equal.
right.
There is no politics. There is no favorites. You come in with your card and you can take out the same
Yeah.
thing as the next person.
And that's the way she wanted it
So
to
that's
be.
how we wanted life to
That's
be.
the way she
If
wanted
only
it to be.
life could be that
And
way.
that's the way it was.
And it was, and it is, as we
And it is.
remember her.
It is.
When you walk in this building, you sense it, but you get the sense of warmth. I mean, your mother started serving coffee in Plaza Center Library. Before that was
Remember that.
the in thing to do.
Right.
She had to stop it when they spilled the coffee on our fax machines.
Oh,
But
listen, I remember people going in there and they would tell me, they would stop me in the street and say, hey, that's like my home. Your mother has made it
right,
so comfortable in there.
she did.
And the attendance of people using the library skyrocketed during our administration.
Well, she was always looking for something new.
Yes.
She envisioned something. I remember even the fax machine that I just mentioned. We had to have one when she heard about it. We had to have it the next day, if not the day before. And another day she said to me, Kathy, I want a mouse. I said, excuse me? She said, I want a mouse. I said, you have to have the computer to go with the mouse. So she got me a computer, put it on my desk, and said, go at it. And that was the first computer in the library. But it was your mother who pushed and said, we're going to do this.
Well, can you imagine looking down from heaven now, how she would think of
Oh,
all the
yes.
technology we have now? She would be loving it.
She would be loving it and probably thinking of something new that's out there that we don't have. Although we just got our first 3D copy machine.
Really?
Yes. So that if
I've
you
actually never seen one of those.
wanted, I can't wait to see it myself, but they have it here.
Wow.
And I know the students are creating, up in the robotics with my daughter in the high school, they're creating buildings, and there's going to be a winner. And that winner is going to be able to do the 3D copy of their building. So who knows? But I know she knows, because she's up there. She's got things on her mind. As we come to the end of your segment of the history of the library, what would you like to add? What would you like to say? This is just Roger Grazioli speaking.
Well, I would like to thank you for asking me to participate in this segment. I love talking about my mother. She was a wonderful, wonderful person on all levels. I would like to thank Secaucus Public Library, Fred Graffel, for videotaping this. And I'm just very pleased, I'm sure she would be pleased, that this segment was included in the history of the library. And I'm sure moving forward, the Secaucus Library will continue to improve and improve. It's a wonderful place. So I go into some other towns in libraries, they're nothing like this. This is beautiful. And she would see that, and I would like to add that she would be very proud.
Good. We certainly hope so. She worked hard enough. I've gone through the minutes of the meetings to see how hard she fought for libraries, not just here in Secaucus, but across the state.
Absolutely.
So we are very grateful she belonged to us.
Thank you.
And you had her as a mom.
Yes, I did. I was very lucky in that regard.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for adding to the history of the library.
You're welcome. My pleasure.